The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Hojo-san is in Tokyo today. So I'm on the hot seat. So you probably recall that when I'm sitting here, I frequently talk about a particular text, a part of one version of the Shobogenzo, a chapter called 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination. And as I said previously, this is mostly a long quote which Dogen seems to just have picked up and set down in this particular version of the Shobogenzo. This other text is called the Sutra of Collected Past Deeds of the Buddha. So today we take up the 7th gate of the 108. Pure conduct of the actions of the mind is a gate of Dharma illumination, for it eliminates the 3 poisons. So that's our topic for today. So this is the 3rd gate that we've talked about related to the places where we create karma. So you might remember a couple of talks ago, we looked at the conduct of the actions of the body. And the one that talked just before this one was conduct of the actions of the mouth, and this time it's conduct of the actions of the mind. So we have body, speech, and mind. And we know these are the 3 places where we create karma, or sango, 3 forms of behavior, if you will. So when we do our repentance verse, all my past and harmful karma, we talk about the body, speech, and mind. So when we looked at the actions of the mouth, last time we saw that the things we say can lead to action, right? So it's important to be careful about what we say because it can lead to some action, wholesome or not. Likewise, our thought leads to speech. So now we have thought leading to speech, leading to action, right? So we can see that this conduct of the mind is really the beginning of this whole chain of events. So it's really important we pay attention to what's going on up here, not just for our own comfort, but because there's a whole sequence of things that happens, which begins with conduct of the mind, or what happens in the mind. So if our thoughts are wholesome, we have magnanimous mind, nurturing mind, and joyful mind. I hope those are familiar. The 3 minds of Sanshin, literally 3 minds. So Dogen Zenji recommended that a person who is working to benefit all beings, which I hope we are as bodhisattvas, should maintain these 3 mental attitudes, this magnanimous mind, nurturing mind, joyful mind. So this magnanimous mind, although this will be familiar, it's helpful to hear it again. This magnanimous mind is calm and steady, like a mountain or an ocean. And it accepts things without differentiation. So just as the ocean accepts all of the rivers, all of the water that comes along from the rivers, this magnanimous mind kind of accepts without losing equanimity. Nurturing mind, literally old mind, is like the mind of a kindly grandmother or a parent who really takes delight in caring for the children or the grandchildren or the other beings. This is the spirit of the bodhisattva. This is the really mature kind of bodhisattva practitioner. Joyful mind is the joy that arises even when we're in the midst of difficulty. And we talked about this. One of our other gates was about delight. And this is the kind of delight that we were talking about, this joy that arises just from understanding how the world is, understanding interconnectedness in a really deep way. Even if we're having a bit of a tough time, we understand that we're together with all beings, we're not living separately, and out of that this joy arises. So if we have kind of wholesome thoughts, these are the things that arise. If our thoughts are unwholesome, we have greed, anger, and ignorance, which is the opposite. And these are the 3 poisons. So these sandoku, these 3 poisons, are the opposite side We have two sides of one thing, right? This is the opposite side. This greed, anger, and ignorance. These three poisons are a really central element in Buddhist teaching. I'm sure this is not the first time you've heard about the three poisons. This is really quite central because these three poisons lead to this craving, or tanha, or thirsting desire, as Hojo-san translates it, which is the basis of suffering. So it's really important that we pay attention to these three poisons and how they arise, and how we act on them and carry them forward. So you may have seen a picture of the Buddhist wheel of life. Right in the center of this Buddhist wheel of life is a little circle which has a pig, a bird, and a snake. And these represent the three poisons. And if you look at any version of this, you'll see that each of these animals has in its mouth the tail of the one ahead of it. So it's an unbroken circle in that way. Why? Because these things are dependent on each other. These three poisons don't arise by themselves. These three poisons are interconnected, right? So ignorance in particular is seen as the root of the other two, but still they play back and forth. These things are not separate. Greed, anger, and ignorance arise together. It's difficult to separate them in some ways. So right at the center of the human experience is this thing we're calling the three poisons. It's this tendency towards these three poisons arising in our mind. Because we're born in this human form, our karma has caused us to be born in this human form. Right in the center of our experience is this arising of three poisons, moment by moment by moment by moment by moment. So it's the very root of our suffering. If amelioration of suffering is at the heart of our practice, this is the heart of that, right? So it's really important. This is how we get trapped in samsara. It's how we get trapped in this world of delusion and suffering, these three poisons. So if these three poisons are at the center of our sort of human experience, then it's not surprising that the world of engaged Buddhism, if you will, says that we've institutionalized these three poisons in ways that reinforce our delusion. So there's a lot to chew on here. We have a lot to talk about today. There's a lot of ways we can go with this, so I hope we have a good discussion. So Hojo-san has written that Zazen is like an acupuncture needle to heal the sickness which is caused by these three poisons. So in Zazen, we sit down, we take this posture, we stop creating karma with body, speech, and mind. And it makes a lot of sense if you look at what we're doing. We're going to sit and take this posture with the body, and we're not going to get up and take action based on what's arising here. So if I'm sitting Zazen and suddenly I feel angry, I'm not going to leap up off the cushion and get a knife. Right? I'm not going to create more karma that way. If I'm sitting here and I really feel like I need chocolate, I'm not going to leap up off the cushion, probably, and go find something, right? I'm just going to sit here. I'm just going to take this posture and sit here and stop creating karma with the body. Because I'm not moving around based on craving and desire and aversion and all of these things which pull us around. So this is one of the reasons it's really important to take this posture. During Zazen, we don't do any talking, I hope. So we're not going to get into any trouble there. We're not going to raise any karma with our talking. We're not moving, we're not talking. Body and speech. So what about mind? Well, we know we sit and take this posture and we simply let go of thought. We're not grabbing it, we're not engaging with it, we're not writing a story about it, we're not getting on the train and going out of town with it. We're watching it arise, we're watching it go. We're not creating separation by being in relationship with that thinking, right? As soon as we don't create subject and object, we are on our way to not creating karma with our thoughts. So we have body, speech, and mind, right? So here we sit in Zazen, giving ourselves a chance not to create more karma. We can watch these three poisons arise, but we're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to engage with it. We're not going to take action based on it, right? So we can see that Zazen is really a way to purify this body, speech, and mind, if you consider it that way. Our karma is playing out while we're sitting here. Thoughts are arising, as Hojo-san often says, because we have this karma of being in this form, and the brain creates thought. So karma is playing out. But if we're not doing anything with that, we have a chance to purify body, speech, and mind, and to somehow work on these three poisons. So interestingly, Hojo-san also warns us about creating another kind of poison with our zazen. So we're here sitting zazen, trying to do something about these 3 poisons, but there's an opportunity to create poison with our sitting. Because he says, if our motivation to practice is influenced by the 3 poisons, that is, if we practice for the sake of making this person more important, more powerful, more enlightened, or for anything else, then it's motivated by greed. I want to get this or that. It may not be for wealth or power that we practice, but for something spiritual. If we practice in order to get something desirable, however, our zazen is generated by greed. It's kind of hard to avoid that, isn't it? I mean, we got on a cushion the first time because we want something. We feel some suffering, or our lives don't have meaning, or we want to create some kind of exotic persona, or whatever it is that gets us on the cushion the first time. For me, I was looking for a way to make decisions. How do I make decisions in my life? Based on what? Because I thought, this is not enough. There's something else happening, right? So I had some desire at that point, some greed for an answer. And I think we all do when we come to practice. So we have to be careful about what our motivation is. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't practice. We've often said here, we take a good action, but somehow maybe there's always a little something in there for us, right? That doesn't mean we shouldn't take good action. We just need to be careful to observe and be aware and pay attention to what's going on. And he says also, if we practice in order to escape from our present condition, then the practice is motivated by anger or hatred toward this condition. We often call this way-seeking mind, but our way-seeking mind can be very deeply influenced by the 3 poisonous states. This is a strange contradiction. In order to practice to be free from the 3 poisonous states of mind, we need the 3 poisonous states of mind. So we want to escape from our condition of confusion, or pain, or suffering, or procrastination, or whatever that gets us on the cushion. So now we have aversion, right? We have craving and aversion right here that's driving our zazen. Here's 3 poisonous mind right in the middle of zazen. What do we do with that? It's very interesting. So I think this is why we sometimes say that suffering is really our friend in this practice. We need the suffering in order to practice. It's the suffering that gets us on the cushion, right? So to completely do away with suffering is perhaps less useful than to understand it, to see it deeply, to watch it arise. So in these 6 realms of samsara, there's these 6 realms of samsara. And sometimes it's said that the human realm is the only realm in which we can practice. So we're really fortunate to be born in this form, to be born in the human realm, because this is the only place we can really practice. If we were born into a heavenly realm and we had it good all the time, and we never felt any suffering, we would have no motivation to practice. Now, what we wouldn't understand is whatever good we have is temporary, right? Because all things are impermanent, so we think we've got it good and it's going to go on forever. Of course, not true, right? In the human form, we have some opportunity to have some insight about that and to get on the cushion of practice. So we have to use the 3 poisons, I think, to transcend the 3 poisons, which is an interesting way to practice. Use our suffering to transcend our suffering. Use forms to transcend forms, right? We encounter this in a number of places in our practice, which is all, again, about form and no form, all together, right? So that's enough of a challenge when it comes to ourselves as individual humans just trying to navigate our lives and make it through the day and have some modicum of peace. But what about the potential for institutionalizing these 3 poisons in ways we don't even realize and in ways that perpetuate them? So if we think of societies or institutions as a sort of a collective self, here's a self and here's a self, of course this bigger organization, institution, society, human world is not separate from us. It's an extension of us. So of course it reflects our mind state. Of course it reflects our thinking and our delusion. So if we're deluded, we take action based on that delusion. We create the causes and conditions for the perpetuation of delusion, whether that's an individual or a society or an organization, an institution, whatever. So this is how karma keeps unfolding, right? There's no reason to think that if we're deluded, our larger organizations wouldn't also be, right? They're made up of humans. So there's a professor by the name of David Loy, of whom you may have heard. He's quite active in the whole, I wouldn't say engaged Buddhism so much as he's really into looking at our institutions and how they may perpetuate suffering and some of the political, economic, sociological ramifications of practice and the relationship there. So he writes some interesting stuff. So he's written a lot about this, and he always points to three areas of our kind of structures, infrastructure. And according to him, the economic system is institutionalized greed, our military is institutionalized ill will, and the mainstream media, or the corporate media, commercial media, are institutionalized ignorance because their purpose is to profit, right, from the advertising and whatnot, not necessarily to inform or to educate in a truthful way. So he says, according to him, here's three examples of this institutionalized three poisons. Now you can agree or not, but it's interesting that he draws this picture. So, this whole question is really complicated. We can't just sort of decide with a broad brush to get rid of these things. Well, we're going to get rid of the economic system or something. We can't do that. We can't just say, oh, well, that's bad. We're going to somehow dismantle it. Not possible. So, we can't really start all over here. What are we going to do? These are huge institutions. So I think to take this on, we really have to look deeply at what is the meaning of well-being. Right? We've all got a different idea, maybe, about what well-being is about. What do we need? What do all beings really need in order to be healthy, in order to be whole, in order to have peace and equanimity? Is it different than what we think we need? Right? There's what we and all beings actually need, and then there's what we think we need, based on who knows. Right? It's an interesting question. So there's a study which just came out last month, which was looking at where in the world people are happiest and using some measures of life satisfaction. Can't measure happiness, right? So they were measuring sort of life satisfaction. They came up with some measures of this and said, where are people happiest in the world? Turned out to be Costa Rica, Singapore, and Denmark, for a lot of reasons, which we could spend another whole hour talking about. But interestingly, one finding was that more money, having more money, does indeed equal more happiness up to a point. When you get to the point that you've got your basic needs covered and maybe a little bit more just to sort of be comfortable, beyond that point, you don't have more happiness, you just have more stuff. You just keep buying stuff. But it doesn't make you happier, right? There was a report in 1999 that said the percentage of Americans who considered themselves happy had peaked in 1957. Even though consumption per person had more than doubled by the time this report came out. So there was more consumption, buying more stuff, owning more stuff, but happiness peaked in 1957. Good grief! But our economy is driven by production and consumption. So if my job is to make stuff in order to have a job and have a livelihood, I need other people to want that stuff and to buy it. Right? So if my job is to make widgets, I need people to buy the widgets so that I keep my job and I can feed my family. So this becomes a discussion about right livelihood, right? In the Eightfold Path, right livelihood. Are my widgets contributing to the quality of life for other people, or are they harming the quality of life for other people? I need to look carefully at what my job is. If somehow my widgets are not contributing to the quality of life for people, but this is the only job I can get, what do I do? I still have to feed my family. Right? These are complicated questions. Because, when I make widgets, I buy supplies from other vendors and I keep them in business. I mean, right? It's a big, complicated, interconnected thing. So we can't flat out say buying stuff is bad, right? Or that somehow production and consumerism is always a bad thing. Because of interdependence, these are tough questions. This is our life. There are those who say that the legal system is institutionalized ill will because it incarcerates more people of color than white people. There are people who say that the military needs to justify its spending, so there always has to be an enemy out there. It's always got to find an enemy. It's always got to have this kind of bad relationship somewhere. There are people who say this. So this institutionalize, it's not only institutionalizing ill will, but it reinforces this idea of separation, right? There's me and you and win and lose, right? So of course these institutions are only really extensions of our own mind state. So we can't not take responsibility. Whether we agree or disagree with what all these people are saying, we can't not take responsibility because there's no separation. This is simply an extension of how we all think as humans. So if our intentions as individuals are wholesome, then we tend to create some wholesome institutions. And if we're clouded, if we're deluded, we can't help but poison our institutions also with our delusion. So again, not simple issues, very complicated issues. Environmental destruction, for instance, is about greed and it's also about ignorance. It's a very complicated thing. Discrimination is about all three of these poisons, greed, anger, and ignorance. So you see how they don't arise separately. They only arise together. You can't pull them apart. At the root of all of this, I think, is fear. Fear that our small selves are not enough as they are, that we somehow need to shore them up, or that they're going to disappear into the shadow of somebody else. Right? So what do we do about all of this stuff? Pure conduct of the actions of the mind is a gate of Dharma illumination, for it eliminates the three poisons. So when I started today, I made the point that the three poisons were part of the human condition. So if we were somehow to be without these three poisons, we couldn't be born in this form. We couldn't take this human form, and we couldn't practice. So now we've got a conundrum. I think a better way to put this, rather than eliminating the three poisons or eradicating the three poisons, is to be free from the three poisons. They will not disappear, but we can be free from them, right? There's a difference there. So Uchiyama Roshi wrote, "Since desires and cravings existing in human life are the cause of suffering, we may struggle to extinguish them and attain the bliss of nirvana. But isn't seeking to get rid of pain and to attain the bliss of nirvana itself a desire or craving? Actually, this too is craving, and precisely because of that, the practitioner is caught in self-contradiction and can't escape suffering. Since desires and cravings are actually a manifestation of the life force, there is no reason to hate them and try to extinguish them. And yet, if we become dragged around by them and chase after them, then our life becomes fogged over. It is not a matter of making great effort not to be dragged around by desires. It's just waking up and returning to the reality of life that is essential." So if we have aversion to the three poisons, we've got more three poisons, right? Just like when we're sitting zazen and our thoughts come up, and if we have some aversion to our thoughts and thinking, well, I'm not supposed to be thinking, that's a problem. We simply watch them arise and go. So we have to live in the midst of the three poisons without being dragged around by them, without trying to extinguish them, push them away, pretend they don't exist, hate them. We simply have to recognize what's going on. So because bodhisattvas are not pulled around by their karma, they don't transmigrate through the realms of samsara based on these three poisonous minds, because they've taken this vow to save all beings. So as bodhisattvas, we know our job is to continue to function right here in the midst of three poisons, in the midst of samsara and delusion and suffering, and simply show up and to keep showing up. And that's not an easy thing to do. But there's nowhere else to go, right? Samsara and nirvana, both right here. So there's nowhere we can go to escape three poisons. Here they are. I'm sorry. So these three poisons come up because of our beginningless karma, right? Somehow our beginningless karma caused us to be born in this form, and three poisons are here. So the best we can do, really, is try not to create more. We can't escape from them, but we can try not to create more bad karma, or to perpetuate three poisons in some way. We simply have to let go of them. Just as we do in zazen with our thoughts, we have to let go of them moment by moment by moment by moment. We see them arising, we see them coming, we're aware of what's happening, and we open the hand, right? We let go of them without engaging with them, carrying them forward, taking some action based on them, and again, using three poisons to transcend three poisons. So pure conduct of the actions of the mind in this Dharma gate, I think, is to see these three poisons coming up and to let go of them and to not be pulled by them, not take action based on them. So if we look at these three poisons, they're all really self-centered, right? They're really self-involved. This greed and anger and ignorance is all about this small self. So if we give up the opportunity to do something that inflates the ego, I think that's the biggest gift we can give to the world, right? To give up the opportunity to make ourselves look bigger, better, right? This is a conclusion I came to a long time ago, actually. I was working on my master's thesis at the time, and somehow I came to this conclusion and said, you know what? Really, one of the big things about being a bodhisattva is to give up the opportunity to feed your ego. It's like, wow, that's a huge gift to people. Because look at what doesn't happen if you don't do that, right? It's just so tempting. So, job one is to see the urge to do this coming up in the mind, driven by these three poisons. So you're sitting in the break room with your coworkers, you're all having lunch, you're having a conversation about stuff, and you can watch your mind, maybe, looking for that opportunity to engage in something, name dropping, humble bragging, draw attention to that new phone you got, new expensive watch, put in this plug for this trip you took, right? Because we want to participate in the conversation, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're like me, every once in a while you see this coming up and you think, I want to just get that in there so people think I'm something. And not to do that, to keep yourself from doing that, is a huge gift. Because how does it help? Saying those things, how does it help? It's all about this one, right? So here we can see how something starts with the thought, starts with the conduct of the mind. I'm sitting in the break room with my friends. Something comes up, I say something, I take some action about something. Passing up that opportunity for self-aggrandizement. What a huge gift. Not doing something, I think in this practice is sometimes as important as actually doing something. Not taking an action is sometimes just as important and just as helpful. So Hojo-san says, letting go of our self-centered views in practice, we are freed from the three poisonous minds, supporting the entire network of interdependent origination as it supports us. So if we're not stuck in the delusion that there's this fixed, abiding self that needs defending, then three poisonous minds don't arise, or arise a little less, right? Because they're all about self. They're all about somehow protecting self.
Would you read that quote again, please?
Certainly. Hojo-san says, letting go of our self-centered views in practice, we are freed from the three poisonous minds, supporting the entire network of interdependent origination as it supports us. Yeah. Why? Because we're not creating separation. These three poisons are about self. As soon as we're all about self, here's the barrier, here's the boundary, here's the separation. Now we've cut ourselves off. We think we've cut ourselves off from this network of interdependent origination. So by by letting go of that, letting go of three poisons, we don't separate ourselves from this entire network. And we support the network, and the network supports us. Can I, let me do
please,
questions
please.
at the end, because I know we're going to have a big discussion, because there's so much to chew on here. So hold that thought. Okay. So, yes, giving up self-involvement means we heal the separation. We do what Hojo-san says, becoming one piece, right? That's where we become one piece. But this isn't a linear process, right? It's not like not giving rise to the three poisonous minds means we don't create the separation. But when we don't create the separation, then there's no contact between subject and object, and it's the contact that gives rise to the three poisonous minds, right? So, around and around and around. Does that make sense? People are looking at me as though...
Could you say all that again?
I will. So we'll unravel this a little bit, right? It's another way of saying what we've just said, but let's look at it again. So, when we don't create separation, there is no contact between subject and object, because we've not created subject and object, right? So let me back up. If three poisonous minds don't arise, we don't create the separation. And when we don't create the separation, there is no contact between subject and object, and it's the contact, right, out of which three poisonous minds arise. So it's this continuous, dynamic working. I guess the good news about that is we can enter it at any point. Right? We can either not create separation, or we can either work on not creating separation or not arising three poisonous minds. But you see how this all arises together. It's not possible to separate these things. There's a total dynamic function happening here. So separation and poison arise together because they're dependent on each other. We need one for the other. So these things are quite closely linked. So if these three poisonous minds don't arise, if we understand there is no separation, then we lose the compulsion to do things like break precepts. The urge to break a precept doesn't arise, right? Because breaking a precept is mistaken understanding about how things are and how the self is. So we don't take unwholesome action, or maybe less unwholesome action, right? So, so we've talked about not doing things as a gift to the world. We're not doing things as a way to sort of hit off these three poisons. But there are things we can actually do also to sort of ratchet down the development of these three poisons. So again, Hojo-san says, let me back up and say what he's talking about. Dogen writes about these kinds of activity in the Bodhisattva Shishobo, or the Bodhisattva's four embracing actions, and Hojo-san has written a little about this fascicle, which I want to share with you. It's a bit long, but I think it's important. All Buddhist practices are about cessation of suffering in samsara by being released from these three poisonous minds. This basic structure is also true in the case of the four embracing actions. Offering, or dana, is a way to be released from greed. Loving speech is a way not to be caught up in anger and hatred. Beneficial action is a treatment for both greed and anger. Identity action is a practice to be free from the ignorance of self-centeredness through the wisdom of seeing the heart of being that is empty of self and interconnected with all beings. Commonly, the four embracing actions are considered to be methods of guidance used by bodhisattvas to lead people to become Buddhists. But in Dogen Zenji's teachings, as it is clearly said in the section on beneficial action, the practice of the four embracing actions are not only the way to lead others, but also the way for the person practicing them to be free from the three poisonous states of mind. So if we're doing these things, we're helping ourselves, and we're also helping all beings, right? Because, again, no separation. So not only do we reduce the amount of three poisonous mind for ourselves, we reduce it in the world for other beings, whether that's other individual beings or institutions or whatever that is, right? So to quickly just review these four, we could spend another whole day on this, but quickly to review these four things. So offering. We can say that giving and receiving really are already happening in every moment because, as we've talked about, there's this interconnectedness. So this giving and receiving is already happening. We don't have to do anything about that. But what tends to happen is we get in the way of it. We block that flow because of our self-centeredness, our misunderstanding of the nature of self. So this, again, is happening anyway, but somehow we stand in the middle of it because we want to cut off that flow of stuff and hoard it all for ourselves. Right? It's like there's a river flowing, we want to put a dam in it and create a pond or create a lake and keep all that water for ourselves. So we get in the way, right? We just get in the way. So that block is greed. That's how greed is. And that's why offering can be the other side. Simply to open the hand, simply to get out of the way. It doesn't mean you have to make an expensive gift to somebody. It simply means you don't cut off that flow, right? So there's more than one way to look at these things. So loving speech, we've already spent a fair amount of time in the last talking about right speech and how all of that works. Conduct with a mouth. So I'll just say here that loving speech arises from a compassionate heart. It's about avoiding harmful words or violent words, right? So it's about paying attention to what we say. Beneficial action also arises from compassion, and this is helping other people without any expectation of personal gain. So I'm going to help you, but I'm not looking for a reward. I'm helping you because you need help. Or I'm doing something good in the world, not because I want to look important or get any kind of monetary gain or anything. I'm helping because in this moment what needs to happen is help, right? So Hojo-san says it's a treatment for both greed and ill will, right? Because I don't care who you are, you need help, I help you. So I'm not labeling you. I'm not, I'm only going to help important people, or I'm only going to help beautiful people, or people like me, or people in my neighborhood, or something. right? So there's no personal benefit, there's no judging. So it's an antidote, if you will, for both greed and ill will. And this fourth one is identity action. This is action that benefits both the person who's acting and the person receiving the action, because I'm identifying with you, right? I'm understanding that we share an identity. So it's like having a shared goal. You know, I'm not acting purely for myself, I'm acting for the benefit of all beings, which doesn't exclude me. So I'm not acting at the expense of somebody else, I'm acting with everybody else. So recognizing non-separation again. So offering loving speech, beneficial action, identity action for bodhisattva activities are all things we can do to function right in the middle of these three poisonous minds. So although we know that these three poisonous minds are arising in ourselves, we see them in the world, there are things we cannot do, and there are things we can actively do, right? So there's something to do. It's not hopeless. So I think doing all of these things, we turn the three poisonous minds into this one mind of true reality. We know there's form and emptiness. There's three poisonous minds, there's also one mind of true reality, which exists together. So I think that's how we make these three poisonous minds a gate of Dharma illumination. How we use three poisons to transcend three poisons. What would you like to say? I know you have something to say or ask, and probably other people do as well. Would you like to go first?
The concept of desire and bad karma. We hear people talk about good karma.
Mm-hmm.
The antithesis, apparently, of bad karma, right?
Well,
I mean, people, use this term.
two sides, yes.
Yeah, right, two sides. Well, now, greed. If a person desires to be more compassionate, more empathetic, a better person, whatever that might mean, is that greed?
Not necessarily, because it's based on the motivation. So if our desire to be more compassionate is about our desire to do good in the world, and not about a desire for this one,
Right.
it's not necessarily greed. It's
Some
simply
desires can be good desires.
yes.
That's what I'm
Yes, it's all about the motivation. So if I'm trying to be compassionate so that people think I'm compassionate, that's a problem. If I simply have a desire to be compassionate because I've taken bodhisattva vows, whether publicly or not, to free all beings and to help all beings, go for it.
Well, many times we want to do these things on two levels. To help other people, but also by acting upon these, sometimes it makes us feel better about ourselves. Now, is that ego-centered?
Hard to know. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, we have some desire to feel that we're living meaningful lives and doing good in the world. And as motivations, I don't think those are bad motivations. But I mean, there's no yes, no, black, white, it's all a spectrum. I think if we get caught up in our desire to feel good about ourselves, that can be a problem. If we feel good about ourselves as a result of some good action, that in itself, I think, is not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
Yeah. If that happens as a result of our good action, okay. If we're taking good action in order to gain something for ourselves, we need to look carefully.
And how do we know? How do you differentiate? You're not always sure sometimes.
There are very few pure actions in this human world.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we don't take good action. That doesn't mean I'm not going to help you because I'm going to feel good because I help you. I should help you because I need to help you. That's what we do.
Sure.
But in the midst of that, can we pay attention to three poisonous minds arising? It's complicated.
It is. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who else? I'm sure Greg has something to say.
So I'd like to add to the complexity of your issue, because, I see this primarily with mothers, that taking time for oneself is really vital and extremely difficult for a whole host of reasons, just for the fact that there's only 24 hours in the day, plus there's this understanding that as my child, as my family is better off, so am I.
Mm-hmm.
So their happiness has an effect on me. So finding the time for self-care is, particularly when it's framed as part of caring for others, then it makes sense, sort of like, okay, oxygen mask on me first, and then the child or the elder. This morning, in fact, I was reflecting on two desires. One is to experience joy, pleasure. The other is to serve. And I began looking at that and began to see how serving others is a pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
and how to deepen my pleasure, to serve others. Wait. The two sort of folded.
Of course.
As I went into one, the other came forward.
Of course.
As I went into that one, then the other came forward.
Of course. Of course. Well, you know, we've talked about joy. We talked about the arising of joy. So if we see clearly interdependence, then service to others comes from that. And right in the midst of that, this joy arises. So that's not a self-centered joy.
Yeah.
The mother taking time for herself is not a self-centered motivation.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about saving all beings includes this one, right? To help other people at a real expense to ourselves is about martyrdom.
Yeah.
And martyrdom is about ego, right? There's nobody left out. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, which means there's nothing outside of it. There's nothing outside of Buddha's way, there's nothing outside of Buddha nature, there's nothing outside of Dharma. That includes this one. So if we're leaving this one out, we need to think again. We need to look carefully, right? So yes, it's true that, you know, in a practical way, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of other beings.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. But on a much broader level, there was no reason not to take care of this one, because here's a being also, right? So to not take care of this one in a kind of a habitual way is a problem. I mean, you know, all of us, we've got a project, the family needs us, there's Shin, I mean, you know, we work until we work ourselves into the ground for a short period of time, for a short-term kind of project. But if that's not your life habit, you know, you can survive. If that becomes your life habit, and I'm giving all the time because either I think I have to carry the whole world on my shoulders because I'm the only important one who can do it, you know, that becomes a problem. And as you say, that's a complex issue. Nobody can decide that for anybody else. I mean, karma is really complicated. We don't know why we're in that circumstance. But to respond to what I think you were saying, self-care is not selfish.
Okay.
You know, we all need to take care of ourselves. It's not about giving up our whole life for, you know, for something. We have to take care of ourselves because this one is not left out.
Could I do an interesting, what I consider an interesting twist on this from Christianity's perspective? So I got the message as a Catholic that giving up your life for others is the greatest thing that you can do. And what came to me after practicing Buddhism for a while was, wow, what if Jesus was happy to do that? Because that was the most fulfilling action possible for him. It was a radically different notion. I'm not saying it wasn't painful, but what if his heart was completely open and saying yes to the whole experience? Then I get a sense that Buddhism and Christianity are not conflicting around this central notion that you're talking about.
Well, you know, I'm not a mother, but I can imagine a mother giving birth and how physically traumatic that can be, and yet she's very happy to do that. Why? Because she's giving. So I think there are times in life where the heart is completely open and we're willing to give everything we have in a very selfless way. And the motivations around that are interesting, you know. But in that case, it's not about I'm doing it for my own personal gain. I mean, that really is bodhisattva activity, you know. not being a parent, I look at parents and think, that's bodhisattva activity. Man, I could never do that. I salute the parents in the room because I'm pretty sure I could never do that. 2 cats is enough, you know. So I think there are occasions in human life where we are in that position. And when you were describing that, immediately my first thought was, that's a mother. That's a mother. That's a parent. But I don't know firsthand. Other people? Other comments, other questions? Or more from you if you like. Allison.
So my question is about those activities where people produce a product that is somehow understood to be their own product and they put their name on it. So an example would be you giving a Dharma talk that's being videotaped and is going to be posted online or whatever. And probably even more intense would be writing a book, let's say, or doing a translation or something like that of Dharma teaching. So I see those kinds of things as very difficult. You know, it takes a lot of effort, let's say, to write a book, publish a book, and I imagine that a person would get something from that for themselves, greater fame or whatever. So we might say it takes ambition to do that thing. It might be a kind of personal ambition, but I'm guessing that that's not the best way to understand that activity, because what you're really doing, you said at one point, there are very few pure actions, but your root motivation would be to spread the Dharma, right? And so it seems to me inevitable that there would be some personal ambition or energy that would need to be there to help complete such a big project. But the important thing is spreading the Dharma. Is that how you would see that?
I think rather than ambition, the word I would use is aspiration.
Oh, okay.
Because you don't have to wear this to be engaged in sharing the Dharma. We're all sharing the Dharma. As soon as you take bodhisattva vows, whether publicly or not, we're engaged in sharing the Dharma. So, I mean, certainly when I became a Dharma teacher, I had certain aspirations, certain kinds of work I thought I wanted to do in the world. Every Shuso who comes along, I hope, engages in that. I'm pointing to him because he's the next one.
Yeah.
Engages in some kind of discernment that says, okay, this is a gateway time for me. I need to think about what kind of Dharma leadership do I want to be offering in the world. And around that we create some aspiration. I know Dharma teachers who are very well known, have their own brand, if you will, can't walk down the street, you know. And then I know Dharma teachers who are fabulous and nobody knows anything about them. They have very small sanghas, they're in very small towns, but they're they're in the zendo every morning, they're running the place, they're giving the talks, they're in the community, they're in the prisons, they're doing pastoral care. And I know lots of those. I mean, they're not, those folks in the smaller sanghas are not ambitious in the way that even some of them I've said, you should really write up these Dharma talks and publish them because they're fabulous. But that's not their priority. Sometimes what I get back is, well, I would do that if I had time, but I've got a sangha to take care of. I mean, their aspiration is take care of their sangha. I'm needed here to deal with the people who are practicing it. If we get the book done, okay, but. So there certainly needs to be some energy there to be a one-person Dharma center. Been there, done that. Takes a huge amount of energy. You're in this, you're in the zendo first thing in the morning. You're in the zendo the last thing at night. You have this weird bookend day because that's when your people can be there. So your whole life revolves around that. It certainly takes some aspiration, and it takes some diligence, and it takes some effort and some energy. but that's not about your personal aggrandizement.
Mhm.
It's easy to fall into it, and it doesn't matter what job we have, right?
Right,
This can be
right.
true of anybody doing anything. So, writing the book in itself is not a bad thing. If it becomes well known and you get some support for your life, cool, But it's also easy to get trapped and say, well, I need to build the brand. I need to do the next book. It needs to be bigger than the last one, I need to get more people into my Zendo. I need to, do that TV interview, whatever it is. If it comes to you, great. But if it doesn't, that doesn't mean your Dharma work is not worthwhile. We help one being. Our Dharma work is worthwhile. So here we happen to have a teacher who's very well known. I just got a request last night for him to go to Greece. I mean, he's known all over the world. But look at his demeanor. Could you find a more humble guy?
Right,
He's not out there for that.
right.
He's out there to share the Dharma because he took a vow and said, I'm going to do what my teacher asked me to do. I'm going to come across the country and lecture in English, which is a torture for me. Lecturing anyway is a torture for him, but lecturing in English, oh my gosh, So we see very much in this moment by moment, day to day living out of this very personal vow, which was a vow he made with himself and about his teacher. I mean, he clearly saw something we needed over here, which was some way to study Dogen. We had no resources really for the kind of thing that he's doing. He's the only one who can do what he does. Imagine being his successor. I'm not him. So I think we can take some vows, and I think no matter what stage of our practice we're at, we can share the Dharma, and we can do that in a way which is not about self.
I guess one reason I'm asking this question is to be sure that we don't make the mistake of avoiding putting our own teaching out there, or our own creative product, or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's really tough.
Yeah, because, and the reason we might avoid that is we might say, oh, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a serious Buddhist, and so I'm thinking about other people, I'm not thinking about myself, and so I'm not going to be personally ambitious, right? I mean, that's another trap.
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly, and that can keep us perhaps from doing some really good work in the world.
Mhm.
And the other side of that is I'm afraid to put out my creative product of any kind because I'll get shot at.
Right, yeah.
I'm putting my very personal, my children out there.
Right.
And not everybody's going to like it.
Right.
I mean, you could write the best book in the world. Some reviewer somewhere is going to criticize it or think it shouldn't have been this way or that way or something. Now that becomes quite personal to self because this is an extension of me out there, right?
Mhm.
This is true of any action we do or anything we say, anything we do. Somebody won't like it. So it's a real act of courage to create that thing, whatever it is, and put it out there and say, it's going to be received the way it's going to be received. I'm feeling pretty confident about my motivation in putting this out there to help others or to share something about myself or whatever. And if people receive, however people receive it, I can't control that. And it's so easy to get ego in the middle of that. So it can keep us from putting something out there.
Mhm.
So on the one hand, we have Facebook, where we live our whole lives in public. Everyone knows what coffee you drank this morning, and there's that whole piece. And the other side of that is I'm afraid to put myself out there, or to share something about myself, or to share the Dharma, or my creative product, or my work, or whatever, because although it might help people, I might get criticized. I mean, it takes a lot of courage. There's no one answer for that, of course. But I think it's helpful to, I think it's good if we do find the courage to put something out there, even if it's make a comment after a Sunday talk. In some Dharma centers, whether it's like during practice period or various kinds of activities, actually all the Sangha members get an opportunity to do a sort of a mini talk. Or to say, and it might be just something about how something going on in their practice. And most people are absolutely petrified. Because even if they speak a lot in their job or something, just something like talk about the Dharma, it's like, oh my gosh, we can't do that. Well, why? You're practicing. The first Dharma talk I ever gave was as a layperson. And as I recall, I guess the teacher must have been out, this is in Minnesota. Teacher must have been out of town or something at that point. I was on deck to do the talk. I was a layperson, and we had two of our Sangha members. You know, it was a holiday weekend. It was like Labor Day weekend or something. Two of our Sangha members had been up north camping. A huge storm had come through. A tree fell on their tent. One of them was injured. The other was killed.
Wow.
I had the job of breaking this to the Sangha before my Sunday talk. It was the first talk I ever gave. So imagine, you know, I'm a layperson. What do I know? So I did my best. I had to start with this. And I talked for just a short time because I thought this Sangha needs to have tea and grieve. The Sangha doesn't need to hear me, right? So it would have been easy for me to say, oh, not me. But I thought, no, I'm in the hot seat. It's my job now to take care of my Sangha. I better put something out there. I better talk about this. You know, I need to, right? So it takes some courage to share something about ourselves or to take leadership and to put ourselves out there. But I hope we do.
I think a lot of people don't because of the fear of failure.
Sure.
It goes back to the word fear, which you used several times.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can't predict that. We don't know. We'll do our best. We do our best moment by moment. But how we're received, we don't always know.
There's no success like failure, and failure is no success at all.
Well, and we never know when we put something out there. You know, the immediate response might not be the response that we want, but we never know what seeds we plant. I mean, I'm sure we've all been in the position of years later, somebody comes up to us and says, you know that thing you said a couple years ago that really stuck with me? I really saw you being like this or that, and it really helped me later on. So we never know. We never know. Other thoughts for this morning? Comments, questions? There's lots to chew on. Please.
So you started the talk saying it's about the conduct of our mind. And I think you covered this already, but I just want to make sure I am remembering it right. So suppose we have some thoughts that are obviously bad.
Unwholesome.
Yeah, I mean like really bad. Like once I had this is a long time ago, thankfully, but I had a terrible boss. I mean, truly horrible. And during that time, I had a dream that I shot this person with point blank. And I woke up, of course, out of this dream, and I was horrified, you know, had no idea that the depth of my response to that person was anything like that. So I think you said if you recognize your mind is doing something like that, if you realize that, then you don't necessarily suppress it. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't suppress it because that won't help. I mean, there it is. You know,
Right.
we can't ignore it.
So
The fact that it's coming up in your dream means you're processing, you're doing something with this. I mean, you know, whether or not, I mean, we all know in dreams we substitute symbols for things. I mean, who knows what your circumstance was, right? But suppressing it won't help. It'll just come back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to let go of it. It may still come back. If we suppress it, it comes back, and sometimes it comes back bigger, or it comes back from here or here, you know, some strange way we can't predict, right? So this practice is never about suppressing stuff. It's about letting go of it. It's about not engaging with it. But as soon as we're suppressing, we've got craving and aversion, right? We want to get rid of the situation we have. We crave a different situation. Now we've got separation, all kinds of stuff. That's not what we're doing, right? So to simply let go is that middle way between not craving a different circumstance, having aversion to this circumstance. We simply, you know, it's here, but we don't have to act on it. We can simply, right? The next moment, here it is again, or something else. Does it help a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
I would like to add something really briefly, and that is this process that you're describing, recognizing and letting go of it. So I get that 1 out of 100 opportunities. And the other 99 are the unconscious, habitual pattern
Of
of
course.
reacting to that. And then it's already out, the behavior is already done, then there's regret and sometimes self-recrimination, which is a whole nother thing to pay attention to.
Yep.
So I just like for people like me
Which is all of us.
that get the idea and
Yeah.
then actualizing
Yeah.
that as practice, as truly what's happening, is a big, big, big work.
You bet.
Boy,
You bet. That's why this is a lifelong practice. This is why we don't sit down once and get it, you know. But if you're like me, you sit zazen and you start to notice a pattern of thoughts that come up. Oh, here it is again. And it might be different, but you start to see, and this is not the time to psychoanalyze yourself, right? But you're watching this pattern come, and maybe even when you're off the cushion, you start to notice, here's this pattern again. So we can get into it a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
Just a millisecond sooner next time. And eventually one hopes, we're going to hear it is again, I'm not going to take that action, you know. But yeah, we got to recognize, and because we are humans, and because we have karma, and because the karmic seeds are very, very, very deep, and they meet certain causes and conditions, and something happens, right? It's the human condition, and it's why we practice. It's why we practice moment by moment by moment, and we still make mistakes. And it's why we do vow and repentance. This is why Hojo-san says our practice is not complete. Because we have all the best of intentions and aspirations, and we make a mistake. So we come to Ryakufussatsu, and we make repentance, and we take vows, and we do it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. So not giving up is important. This is why I keep saying, I say, job one is show up. Keep showing up. That kind of stick-to-itiveness, is not easy, but it's what we need, because there's a lot happening here. This is a complicated machine. Gambate. Good luck. Please.
when you say show up,
Yeah.
every time I sit at home, am I showing up? Is that part of?
That's part of showing up. I just mean show up for your life. Look around. Notice what's happening. Don't ignore stuff. It would be easy to not want to see certain things happening in our lives or happening in the world. But as bodhisattvas, we have to look. We have to see. Right? We've got to be aware. We've got to accept that things are happening. That doesn't mean we accept that they're happening the way they should. There's suffering in the world. We have to accept that there's suffering in the world. That doesn't mean we don't do something about it. Job one is to see the suffering. And it would be so easy to do one of these. Yeah. That's not my community. Those people aren't like me. I don't have any responsibility. Sorry, folks. Interconnection, interconnectedness, no separation. It's all our problem.
Some of it seems so overwhelming, though.
Sure it does. Absolutely. And then we get back on the cushion. Start here. Because if we're clear here, and we go out the door, and we see somebody we can help, we're just going to help. We're not going to change an institution, but we're going to help somebody whose hands are too full to open the door. It's that stuff. It's our attitude in life. We need to see the opportunity, as much as we need to see what's happening, what's arising here, we also need to see the opportunity to do something else. And if we're not paying attention and we have this habituated thinking, we also don't see those opportunities for bodhisattva action. We need to see the opportunities for the identity action and the beneficial action and the loving speech, and the offering. And we sometimes don't even see the opportunity for that because we're all tied up here. Right? So get on the cushion. Get some clarity. Then you go out the door and you help somebody. Cool.
That much I can manage sometimes.
Good. Good. Well, but we've had many, many conversations, as has Hojo-san, about, we take these vows, save all beings. What the heck? I can't save this being, Good grief. What am I going to do? Again, practice is incomplete, but that doesn't mean we don't take the next step and do the next thing, because we have to. We have to. What else this morning? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.